This briefing focuses on the Netherlands. The goal of this presentation is to inform you on various aspects of that country in preparation for your upcoming investment decision. There are many aspects of a country that may be relevant to potential investment decisions, and the various languages of a country is the first of such issues. Similarities and/or differences in languages can have a substantial impact on a firm's ability to communicate with local customers, suppliers, and even employees. In contrast to Australia, the dominant language in the Netherlands is Dutch. Approximately 80% of the population report this as their mother tongue. Dutch is most closely related to Afrikaans and Low German. The American author Bill Bryson is quoted as saying, "When one hears Dutch, one feels one ought to be able to understand it." Yet this language is different enough from standard Australian English that while there are many similar words, Australians would not be able to speak or read it without training. This can be frustrating. A second issue which can influence a firm's ability to conduct business in a foreign country is the dominant religion. Religion has a potentially powerful impact on people's value systems and can influence how they behave and interact with one another. While Australia and the Netherlands are both nominally Christian countries, most Australians might not realize that the Netherlands is much more heavily skewed to Roman Catholicism, almost double. Additionally, religion is an intensely private issue for the Dutch. Many Dutch people never go to church, and they strongly disapprove of what they might perceive as proselytizing. A third factor which may influence a company's ability to conduct business in a foreign country is the level of industrial development. This not only influences the cost of labor in a country and the consumption patterns, but it also arguably shapes the attitudes, values, and behaviors of the population in general. Despite some obvious similarities, there are also substantial differences between Australia and the Netherlands in terms of level of economic and industrial development. Most notably among these differences is the larger size of the manufacturing sector and a much lower level of motor vehicle ownership in the Netherlands, despite reasonably similar levels of urbanization. A fourth important issue is the similarities and/or differences in the educational systems of countries. Secondary education is compulsory and free in the Netherlands, but unlike Australia, often schools ask for much larger and more frequent parental contributions for public education. Tracking of students is also more common in the Netherlands. Starting at 12 years of age, students are selected to different tracks of education. Some are more professional and vocational oriented, and others prepare students to go on to higher education at research and professional institutions. A fifth critical issue with respect to doing business in another country is similarities and/or differences in the legal and political systems. Despite the obvious similarities, there are a number of differences between Australia and the Netherlands in terms of their political and legal systems. For example, in contrast to the Australian political situation, in the Netherlands the monarch has some elements of actual power. The monarch nominates all the ministers who form the government after an election. In addition to that, within the Dutch government, consensus is much more heavily emphasized. While policies may be vigorously debated behind closed doors, once a policy has been set, all members of the government are expected to publicly support it. A sixth, but potentially more subtle issue, is similarities and/or differences in actual business practices. This can involve simple but potentially embarrassing issues, such as how to properly greet people and attitudes towards time. Dutch business practices differ from Australian business practices in a number of aspects. For example, punctuality is more heavily stressed in the Netherlands, and efficient use of time is of tremendous importance. Appointments will be carefully scheduled. Never assume that they can be changed at the last minute. Spontaneity is not considered desirable. In certain industries, you may find that the higher-ranked executives tend to dress less formally. This is due to the emphasis on egalitarianism within the society. The more successful a Dutch executive becomes, the more he or she must make an effort to maintain an ordinary appearance. Also be aware of recent political events, since the Dutch tend to be keen on discussing politics. But regarding Dutch politics, remember that one's choice of party is considered private information. In conversation, the Dutch may criticize Australian policies, but remember that in Dutch culture, a critical approach is a sign of involvement rather than rejection. The seventh and final issue is the broader set of cultural values which are commonly shared by a large portion of a country's population. Countries can vary in terms of the emphasis placed on individuality versus conformity. the attitudes towards uncertainty and ambiguity, the attitudes towards authority and social inequities, and not the least, attitudes towards how gender roles are allocated in society. While both countries have values rooted in European culture, Australians and the Dutch have some strikingly different cultural values. The Dutch are far more egalitarian in nature. This means that the country is slightly more group-oriented and collectivist, and that equality between genders is far more heavily stressed. This concludes our brief presentation